Meanwhile, pipeline politics remain front and center in the new year. Yesterday, TransCanada announced its plans to sue the Obama administration over its rejection of the Keystone XL Pipeline. The Calgary-based company is filing its claim under NAFTA's Chapter 11, claiming the U.S. government's actions weren't justified. Meanwhile, the Canadian economy, as we've been talking about, continues to take a real downward dive as the loonie and the price of oil are falling yet again. So how will the low Canadian dollar affect the economy in oil-producing provinces like, say, Saskatchewan? And how does the province's premier feel about the latest developments with Keystone XL? Joining me now from Regina, the Premier of Saskatchewan, Brad Wall. Nice to see you, Premier.
Thanks for having me back.
Okay, let's start with Keystone XL, only because it's sort of the latest bit of news. What is your reaction to TransCanada deciding that they're going to sue the Obama administration for $15 billion over the decision to reject that pipeline? Do you think that there is a case there, and given the way NAFTA works, that it's worth pursuing given how long it might take?
Well, I can't speak to whether there's a case there or not, but I'm sure TransCanada has done a lot of due diligence and has more than one legal opinion on this. And so because we've supported the pipeline, the chance to get Canadian oil to tidewater and maximize value for Canadians who own the resource, that's certainly one reason to support it. There are others. But because we've been supportive of it, we do support TransCanada taking the step that they think they need to do to make the case that this decision might not have been based on fact, because there's an important precedent here. We had in this case the State Department, President Obama's own State Department, weighing in on at least two occasions that there was not a particular environmental issue surrounding Keystone that was problematic, that would require it to be denied a permit. And of course, those permits were denied. In fact, remember, the State Department in the U.S. said, look, if the oil doesn't come by pipeline, it'll come by rail, and the greenhouse gas footprint around that is greater than would it be in a pipeline. So we support them in this, yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say, isn't it, though, a business's sort of risk when they're proposing a project like this, that you're going to take the risk of losing money, and then this is sort of their desperate attempt to recoup money when a president who has the executive authority to shut something down decides to do it?
Well, although we have a trade deal, and we are also part of other larger, broader trade frameworks like the WTO. And if any company in Canada or in the United States, for that matter, or in Mexico in the case of NAFTA, feels that a government, maybe our government, has acted in a way that's outside the parameters and the terms of an agreement that we as a country have signed on to, that's their right. That's why, that's what's enforceable about trade agreements. That's why you want them. We've been fighting for years this country of origin labeling issue, and credit our both federal government, the previous government and this current government, for taking a tough stand after we won ruling after ruling at the WTO on behalf of the Canadian beef and pork industry. And now basically the decision's been rescinded, and the program or the initiative's been rescinded, and that's why you've got trade deals, and they can take a very long time, but it's how we hold each other accountable, both in the private and the public sector when it comes to trade agreements. It's why they're sought after.
Okay, well, speaking of trade, there seems to be some movement, or at least some interest on the part of the Trade Minister, Chrystia Freeland, to talk about the idea of a free trade agreement with China. The Prime Minister may, there are rumors, take a trip there over the course of the spring. Certainly it's something China has been proactive about, reaching out to Canada for a free trade deal. How would that help your province? Are you interested in that idea?
This is essential for all of Canada. It is for our province as well. We have increased our exports to China by 230% since 2007. It's such an important market for the whole country, but especially for Western Canada, for Saskatchewan. And credit to the federal government. If this is true, if they're heading in this direction, I credit the Prime Minister. This is an important step to take, especially at a time of some. Obviously, there's economic challenges right across the country. Now's the time to be engaging in a more robust trade relationship, not just with China, but with Asia. We had asked that the previous federal government, in fact, ensure that there was a permanent and full-time ambassador to the ASEAN region from our country. That's the Association of Southeastern Asian Nations. And they took one small step towards that. They had the Indonesian ambassador sort of doing double duty. We would also advocate to the federal government that they look at a separate and permanent ambassador to that region, very important to Canada. We do think, I welcome a focus on Asia. We have a good relationship with the United States, but we need to diversify that as a country, and certainly it's true on behalf of the agricultural sector, the energy sector in our province as well. So we hope it's true, and we'll work with the federal government any way we can to be helpful in this regard.
How do you think, though, they should approach that kind of trade agreement? Because, it's one thing to negotiate TPP, for instance, which still isn't, ratified. It's another thing to try and negotiate a free trade agreement in a country where you don't have similar values and you don't approve of a lot of the violations that they have against human rights. So would you have any concerns about how to engage in a formalized free trade agreement with China because of those reasons?
Well, we're already doing a lot of trade now with China. It's a very important trading partner for the country, and it's the second most important trading partner for Saskatchewan. And so, we have to be a little bit careful. Apparently, we don't have enough issue. We don't take enough issue with any differences we have with China, as you've pointed out, to prevent the huge trade that's going on now. And so, so what's the difference in terms of taking the next step?
Right.
More importantly, perhaps, and on point, obviously human rights is important to all Canadians, and how those that we have trading arrangements with treat people in their own country, treat the issue, are acting in terms of human rights should be important to us. I just think we have a better chance of our Prime Minister and our federal government having some influence on the issue of human rights, frankly, if we're engaged with them economically, if we're responding to, as you pointed out, China's own interest in a trade agreement. I think we have a better chance of seeing improvements on the human rights front in countries we trade with if we have a more dynamic relationship informed, I think, by trade agreements would be the preference.
Let's talk about the Canadian dollar. It's hit the lowest level in 12 years yesterday. Price of oil dropped to a record low. We heard from the Governor of the Bank of Canada today basically saying, these things have to sort themselves out. Is that all that has to be done? We just have to weather the storm here? Or what concerns do you have in Saskatchewan about what the low price of oil and the low dollar will do to your economy?
Well, first of all, with respect to the low dollar, there's certainly advantages in terms of the price of our exports around the world. In Saskatchewan, our budget's based on our products being sold around the world at a US dollar, so there's actually some benefits. But with respect to the low price of oil, I do think it's important to point out that we're another sector of the economy, another major sector, for example, the auto sector, and there was this much stress in some other sector, and there is a lot of it, certainly. We've seen thousands of layoffs to date in the energy sector and more to come. Were this happening elsewhere, I think there would be a call for some action. And we're not in the province of Saskatchewan, and neither have I heard the energy sector across the country calling for any kind of a bailout. But perhaps there could be a recognition from the federal government in its new infrastructure initiatives for there to be some additional investment in those economies that have been particularly hit by the low energy prices. Perhaps, for example, there could be some additional retraining dollars. We're fortunate in Saskatchewan. We've ended this year in a relatively strong position. We have the lowest unemployment rate in Canada still. We had a pretty solid job creation record through the year as a province, not the government. We're not taking credit for it, but 7,200 new jobs created, and our population's still growing. But there are challenges here, to be sure, and they're significant not just for the West, but for all of Canada, and I hope the federal government would look at it that way.
I only have about 30 seconds, but what's the single most important thing that signal you would like to see from the federal government to sort of bolster your economy while you're struggling with both of those things?
Well, I'm going to give you two. The long term is trade. So let's lead on TPP and get it ratified, and get CETA ratified, and engage with China. And then secondly, on a shorter term basis, if we could recognize the challenge in the energy sector with the federal government, looking perhaps at infrastructure dollars in a little bit of a different way, as I've just referenced, that would be helpful too. I certainly think that would be welcomed.
Okay, Premier, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for your time today, sir.
Thanks, Rosie.